This film could have been a dark thriller in the style of The Terminator, but instead became a family-friendly comedy about a lovable robot that came to life, and raised an entire generation of fans. Movies Inside Out presents Short Circuit is a 1986 sci-fi comedy about a military robot that gains human intelligence after being struck by lightning. What role did Steven Spielberg play in the production? What quirky ritual kicked off each day of filming? Why are the creators still being accused of racism? And is a remake actually in the works? You'll get answers to all that and more right now. Let's dive in. The creation story. The theme of robots and artificial intelligence was one of the most prominent in 1980s movies and pop culture. That very decade gave the world such hits as The Terminator, Blade Runner, and RoboCop. And while most films about robots explored the relationship between humans and machines in a rather dark tone, the creators of Short Circuit approached the topic differently. However, according to rumors, Short Circuit was originally conceived as a tense thriller, with Number 5, also known as Johnny, as the main villain, a heavily armed military robot that escapes from a lab. But after several rewrites, the darker elements were softened so much that the film turned into a family-friendly sci-fi comedy.
For crisp yet moist potatoes, brown on one side, then turn over.
The movie was produced by David Foster and Lawrence Turman, who had previously released John Carpenter's horror classic, The Thing, in 1982. The final version of the script was written by Brent Maddock and S.S. Wilson, who had only worked on short films at the time, but later went on to write the Tremors franchise. Jay Tarsis also contributed to the script, although his name never appeared in the film's credits. Some believe that both the main character and plot were inspired by Isaac Asimov's short story Robot AL-76 Goes Astray. Others claim Maddock and Wilson based it on a student film they had made about Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial. What the real origin is remains unclear. At some point, the Short Circuit script ended up in the hands of John Badham, best known for the wildly successful musical Saturday Night Fever, starring John Travolta. At the time, Badham had just released another box office hit, the sci-fi action movie War Games, and decided that Short Circuit would be his next project. He was deeply impressed by Number 5, and although the original script envisioned the robot as animated, Badham insisted on using practical effects instead. Johnny turned out the way we know him today, thanks to a lucky coincidence. In 1985, Douglas Trumbull made a short film called Let's Go, which featured a robot named Pal, created by robotics effects expert Eric Allard. Badham likely never would have heard of it if not for Steven Spielberg, who saw Trumbull's short and immediately suggested that Badham contact Allard to help create the robot for Short Circuit. After reading the script, Eric Allard spent a single weekend planning exactly how many robots would be needed for the film, which scenes could use only certain body parts, and what each robot would do in each scene, and so on. His detailed notes impressed the filmmakers, and he joined the team, which also included artist Sid Mead, known for his work on Blade Runner, Aliens, and Tron. Allard first created several concept sketches of the robots, and they already resembled the final version of Number 5. Sid Mead initially pushed for a more mechanical, less human-like design, but John Badham convinced him to focus on Allard's concept instead. Interestingly, Badham and the designers spent a long time figuring out how to justify a combat robot having expressive eyes. In the end, they decided that his iconic eyelids were designed to protect his optics from sunlight, like those used on film cameras. Once the design of Number 5 was approved by the studio, Allard moved on to building the full-scale robots and various robotic limbs needed for the film. He and his team had just 14 weeks to build and test everything before shooting began. According to Eric Allard, They first created 2 foam models based on Mead's drawings, and then began building real robots. 2 of them were fully animatronic, with moving fingers, hands, shoulders, heads, necks, eyes, and full control over everything needed for the performance. Another 5 had limited mobility and were used for wider shots. Each full model weighed around 250 pounds, 113 kilograms, and the total cost of all the puppets was about $1.5 million. They also built 8 stunt robots for complex scenes, plus 2 standalone insert arms. But we'll explain what those were used for a bit later, so stay with us. There's still plenty more to come. And that's not all. The team made 3 fully animatronic heads and another 8 that were less flexible. There were also 3 torsos, with necks operated by cables, heads controlled via radio, and arms moved by levers that extended at the elbows, with puppeteers operating everything off-screen. Amazingly, Allard came up with all of this during that one weekend and never had to do any further planning. Once, while Badham was showing the robot to producers, one of them asked if number 5 could dance. Badham shouted, "Of course he can!" without consulting Allard or the puppeteers. Luckily, the crew managed to pull it off, although getting Johnny to move like John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever was no easy task. Casting. Dr. Newton Crosby was played by Steve Guttenberg, who by that time had already gained huge popularity thanks to his role as Carrie Mahoney in Police Academy. By the way, we recommend checking out our video on the making of that iconic comedy. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, make sure to do so to avoid missing any new videos. When Guttenberg first read the script for Short Circuit, he immediately realized that this timeless story about friendship and being an outsider, combined with Badham's direction, would make the film a hit.
It doesn't get pissed off, it doesn't get happy, it doesn't get sad, it doesn't laugh at your jokes. It just runs program.
During pre-production, Guttenberg and Badham had extensive discussions about the challenges of artificial intelligence and how life is tied to the presence of a soul. They also aimed to balance comedy and melodrama so as not to get overly sentimental, focusing instead on the story of an inanimate object coming to life. That's why Guttenberg compared Short Circuit to Pinocchio. Another Police Academy actor also appeared in Short Circuit, George Bailey, who played Captain Scroder.
Whatever it takes to put that stupid contraption out of commission, gentlemen, that's what you do.
Yes, sir.
The role of Stephanie Speck went to Ali Sheedy, who had previously starred in the teen hit The Breakfast Club. She had also worked with John Badham on War Games back in '83.
Come here. Come on, walk this way.
The character of Indian scientist Ben Jabatuya, and more specifically, the strange casting choice, remains a source of criticism, with the filmmakers still being accused of racism. According to Badham, Ben was originally written as an American, but after casting Fisher Stevens, they felt the character lacked uniqueness. That's when Badham recalled the flamboyant Frenchman Serge from Beverly Hills Cop, played by Bronson Pinchot, who rudely dismissed gallery visitors. The director thought it would be funny if Ben were from India and also looked down on dumb Americans. Badham later stated that if this idea had come before casting Stevens, they definitely would have auditioned Indian or Indian American actors. He also insisted that no one ever intended to mock Ben or his ethnicity. Fisher Stevens, however, gave a slightly different account. According to him, Ben was initially written as a Caucasian character with no real distinguishing features. But after the role was offered to Bronson Pinchot, it was rewritten to include ethnic flavor and make it more comedic. Eventually, the deal with Pinchot fell through, and when the part was offered to Stevens, the Caucasian character had mysteriously become Indian. Fisher was asked to speak in a strong Indian accent to make Ben's lines sound funnier.
But what happened? Did she stick her tongue down your throat?
No.
Come on, sit in the van and tell me. I want to know. Yes, sir. Yes, come on, Newton.
He then traveled to India and spent 5 weeks there thoroughly preparing for the role. His efforts paid off. Many Indian viewers were convinced for years that Ben was played by Bollywood actor Javed Jaffrey. Not only did he resemble Stevens, but he had also appeared the year before in the film Mary Jung, wearing similar round glasses and a beard. It took Jaffrey himself to clear things up in an interview, stating that he had not appeared in Short Circuit. Later on, Stevens acknowledged that such an approach would never be accepted today, and the role of an Indian character would of course go to an actor of Indian descent. The role of Dr. Howard Marner, head of the Nova Company, was played by Austin Pendleton, a former classmate of John Badham.
Just the way I like it, shaken but not stirred.
According to Pendleton, his role was initially more significant, but during work on the final version of the script, it was cut down. In 2009, he stated that the script had been much deeper and more interesting than the final film, and that Guttenberg and Sheedy were completely miscast as Crosby and Speck. When he asked Badham why he chose those actors, the director admitted it was at the insistence of the producers. The role of Frank, Stephanie's ex-boyfriend, went to up-and-coming actor Brian McNamara.
I'm calling Nova, and I'm calling the cops. And as for you, you little pain in the neck, you better not come crawling back to me.
While Marvin J. McIntyre played Duke, one of Nova's security officers. You can also spot a cameo by the director himself. John Badham appears as a news cameraman when reporters show up at Stephanie's doorstep. The filming process. Short Circuit was filmed in the town of Astoria, Oregon, also home to productions like The Goonies and Kindergarten Cop, as well as in Washington and California. Director John Badham shared that every morning he would bring Number 5 out to the set, hug him, and encourage all the actors to do the same. He told them to imagine that the star of their film was someone like Eddie Murphy, someone everyone would deeply respect and admire. So Badham suggested they treat Johnny the same way and not just like a big piece of equipment. Additionally, the director decided that the actor's interactions with the robot would feel more natural if Number 5 spoke during filming, rather than being dubbed in post-production.
Not malfunction, Stephanie. Number 5 is alive.
Puppeteer Tim Blaney not only operated the animatronic model, but also voiced all of Johnny's lines on set. Later, Blaney would lend his voice to Frank the Pug in Men in Black. By the way, we already have a video on that film. Check it out on our channel. Initially, Blaney's voice was only intended for the shoot itself, with another actor, Robin Williams, being the top candidate, set to dub the final voice. But after 3 months of production, the crew had grown so accustomed to Blaney's take on Number 5 that they couldn't imagine anyone else voicing the character. So Blaney stayed on through post-production. However, some of Johnny's lines were still re-recorded during editing, allowing the creators to inject even more jokes.
Disguise. Camouflage. Hi.
Number 5!
According to Eric Allard, the models worked extremely well, with all malfunctions or issues resolved in about 2 hours total. Sometimes, if a robot wasn't functioning properly, they'd just swap it out for another model without anyone noticing. Still, Johnny and his fellow bots couldn't move as fast as the script required, so many of the robot scenes had to be sped up in post-production. The crew also used a few clever tricks during filming. For example, Johnny's lightning-fast page flipping or tossing a metal plate were accomplished with simple yet creative effects. Air hoses helped turn the pages, and wire with reverse playback gave the illusion of a plate toss. Whenever Johnny's hands appear in the frame alone, it means the full robot puppet wasn't capable of performing the action, like shutting a van door or pressing small buttons. Interestingly, the sound of the robot's laser in Short Circuit is the same sound effect used for the activation of proton packs in Ghostbusters. And yes, there's a review of that movie on our channel too. In the scene where Number 5 drives the Nova van, he hums the U.S. Marine Corps hymn. That same scene was originally supposed to feature the song Money for Nothing by Dire Straits, instead of El DeBarge's Who's Johnny.
That's the way you do it. Get your money for nothing.
But the rights were too expensive. When Frank tries to catch Johnny and slips on the porch, that was a real accident. If you look closely, you can see Ali Sheedy trying not to laugh. Fun fact, Stephanie's house still exists and was sold in November 2019 for $340,000. Stephanie and Number 5 dance to a scene from the 1977 film Saturday Night Fever, where the Bee Gees' More Than a Woman is playing. Coincidentally, the female lead in that movie is also named Stephanie. The Soviet T-72 tank destroyed by the robots during the military test scene at the beginning of the film was actually a fiberglass replica built over an American M41 Walker Bulldog. Since Short Circuit was made during the Cold War, the crew didn't have access to real Soviet equipment. The movie featuring the Three Stooges that Number 5 is watching is Woman Haters from 1934, and the gangster film with George Raft, which he later mimics a scene from.
Frankie, you broke the unwritten law. You ratted on your friends.
Is Scarface from 1932. After Number 5 is struck by lightning, technician Norman runs diagnostics and reports no damage. But another technician, Jim, says,
"It's amazing. Takes a licking and keeps on ticking."
That line was actually a slogan for Timex watches, used from the 1950s through the early 2000s. One of the clearest signs of Johnny developing self-awareness is his shift from referring to himself in the third person to using I. This is especially noticeable in a scene with Crosby when he says, "I'm alive," instead of "Number 5 is alive."
I am alive.
The film's most memorable line became,
Life not malfunction.
and what moment stood out most to you? Let us know in the comments. Movie mistakes and errors. Now let's take a look at the bloopers and mistakes from Short Circuit that you probably didn't notice. Magic buses. When the two buses bringing spectators from the test site arrive at Nova, one has a blue stripe and the other a red one. But in the next scene, both buses have red stripes. Also, the bus models change between shots. Mysterious radio station. When Number 5 is driving and listening to the radio, the first station broadcasting a horse race is tuned to 94.1 FM. The robot then switches stations twice and stops on one playing music, but the frequency bizarrely remains at 94.1. Strange breakfast. The number of pancakes on the tray that Number 5 offers Stephanie changes between shots, and when Frank lifts the glass of orange juice from the tray, you can see some resistance, likely caused by glue or a magnet used to prevent the glass from slipping during filming. The vampire scientist. When the scientists try to locate Johnny using the computer, the man in the light blue lab coat standing behind Crosby doesn't reflect in the monitor. Disoriented in space and time. Stephanie shows Number 5 the morning sun, but they're looking toward the Pacific Ocean, facing west, so they should be watching a sunset, not a sunrise. Wizard robot. Before stealing Stephanie's van, Johnny quickly reads the owner's manual. However, that booklet alone wouldn't have taught him how to drive. Tricky lightning. The lightning bolt that hits the power lines shouldn't have affected Number 5, as he was known to be plugged into a generator that was isolated from the main electrical grid. Spelling trouble. Stephanie's van has a sign reading "Parties Catered," but the word parties is misspelled. It should be parties with IE. What other oddities or slip-ups did you notice in the movie? Deleted scenes and behind the scenes. Unfortunately, aside from the clips shown during the closing credits, the creators never released any additional deleted scenes. Interestingly, in one of those cut scenes, Number 5 meets the Omnibot 2000, a toy robot released by Tomy in the mid-1880s. Now, let's revisit those memorable credit scenes and take a peek behind the scenes of Short Circuit with a brief selection of fun and fascinating moments from the set. Worldwide recognition. Short Circuit premiered on the big screen on May 9, 1986. The film was a massive hit, immediately taking the #1 spot at the US box office. In total, it grossed over $40 million domestically, and according to some sources, its worldwide earnings surpassed $100 million. Of course, the film's incredible success was due not so much to the cast, but rather to the lovable and touching robot who stole viewers' hearts and became a pop culture icon of the mid-80s. Critics didn't quite share the audience's enthusiasm. While they called the film sweet and good-natured, they also found it too shallow and predictable, especially when compared to Spielberg's E.T. The extraterrestrial, they couldn't help but praise Johnny, calling him a charming protagonist. Short Circuit earned several Film Award nominations. It was nominated for a Saturn Award in the categories of Best Science Fiction Film, Best Director, and Best Special Effects, but unfortunately took home no wins.
Oh my god.
Yeah, welcome to the club, pal.
Germany's Jupiter Award nominated the film for Best International Film and Best International Actress for Ali Sheedy. Composer David Shire, on the other hand, won a BMI Film and TV Award for Best Score. Interestingly, Shire's original score wasn't released until 2008, while the song Who's Johnny became a major hit in the mid-80s, reaching #3 on the Billboard Hot 100. In 1987, a Short Circuit video game based on the film's story was released and widely praised for its graphics and sound. In 1988, the sequel Short Circuit 2 premiered, this time starring Ben, whose last name was oddly changed from Jabituya to Jarvie. The rest of the original cast didn't return, and the director's chair went to Kenneth Johnson, best known for his work in television. The sequel failed to match the success of the original. Interestingly, producers had a script ready for a third installment by 1990, but studio executives considered it a failure and scrapped the project. However, in 1991, a 24-minute educational TV film titled Hot Cars, Cold Facts, featuring Johnny was released. Set after the events of the sequel, Steve Guttenberg once shared that, about 5 years after the film's release, while dining at a restaurant in Paris, a little boy approached him and showed him a miniature Johnny. "I always carry him with me. He's my friend," the boy said. The moment touched the actor, who realized that Short Circuit had become one of those films that leave a mark on both creators and viewers.
Hi, honey, I'm home.
Number 5?
Guttenberg continues to appear mostly in comedies, but Short Circuit remains one of his most iconic roles. Ali Sheedy, despite a strong start to her career, later appeared in several flops, received multiple Golden Raspberry nominations, and eventually faded from the spotlight. Today, she mostly plays minor roles and teaches at the City University of New York. Other cast members also continue to act in lesser-known projects, though Fisher Stevens was the one who built the most successful career. He turned to directing and producing, and even won an Oscar for the documentary The Cove. Director John Badham went on to make several more films, including Bird on a Wire with Mel Gibson and Nick of Time with Johnny Depp, before focusing mainly on TV movies and series. Eric Allard, who later worked on major projects like Spider-Man, Mission Impossible, and The Matrix Reloaded, has said that Short Circuit had the greatest impact on his career. Even nearly 40 years later, people still ask him about it more than anything else. You can even see Short Circuit's influence in later films. Johnny's design echoes in Wall-E, and the story premise inspired elements of Chappie. In 2008, interest in reviving the franchise surged again, and Dimension Films acquired the rights to make a third Short Circuit. The plot was to follow a boy from a single-parent family who meets Johnny and forms a friendship with him. Over the next few years, numerous writers and producers came and went, and the project stalled again. In 2020, a remake of Short Circuit was officially announced, but nothing has been heard about it since. Whether a third film will ever be made remains a mystery. Is number 5 one of your favorite movie robots?